Chapter 4, the Raft. AJ called about 9 and woke me up. When she asked me how I was, I lied. Told her everything was fine and Bobby had just stopped in the day before. I felt bad, but what I did and what mattered when I was heading home anyway. Then I tried my parents, but the phones still weren't working. When I stepped in the elevator and headed down to Starbucks, my heart started to pound until I reached the lobby. The security guard, who always smiled at me, called out, "Aloha." He wasn't there. Back upstairs, I packed, then I went to the pool for a while. Made a ham sandwich for lunch, took a nap. About 4, I got dressed. The drive to the airport, waiting around there, would be hot. But the plane, it would be chilly. So I had my standard outfit for flying. Khaki Bermuda shorts, white camisole, green hoodie. I wore white flip-flops, shoved a pair of socks in my bag. I debated adding in my new Converse, but I put them in my suitcase instead. Then I called the taxi. As usual, the loading of the G1 at the Oahu Air Service was pure chaos. People hauling boxes and cartons and barrels out of the plane. I left my bags by the door and waited in the lounge, looking for a woman who usually was organized in loading. I didn't see her anywhere. A tall, bald guy held a clipboard, so I asked, "Where's Susan?" Sick," he shook his head. Of all days, the Costco order didn't come in and got delivered, and now there's this new co-pilot. He waved at a couple of guys loading the plane. "Hey!" He headed off, leaving me standing there. The pilot, Larry, came around the plane wearing black pants and a short-sleeved shirt. There's a white button-down shirt with gold pilot epaulets on the side shoulders. Tall, with dark hair that never had to have a strand out of place. He swaggered a bit. I waved. His forehead wrinkled for a moment and called out, "Hi, Larry." "Robbie?" A slow smile spread across his face. "I didn't even recognize you. Nice hair." "Thanks. I'm trying to catch a flight home." He nodded. We'll be stuffed, but there's always room for you." "I didn't see Susan." He scratched his head. "Yeah, she's gone today. It's a mess, especially with communications down at the Midway. My new co-pilot is around here somewhere. Trying to make sense of it all. Max, he'll get you on the manifest. Why don't you wait inside where it's cool? Get something for you, and I'll come get you." The waiting lounge inside the Oahu Air Service was air-conditioned, so I dropped my bags, then I plopped down on the couch. There's a little fridge near the seating area. Pulled out a Coke, then I grabbed a handful of chocolate-covered macadamia nuts from the bowl on the table. A golf match blared on the television. It was mounted high on the wall, and there wasn't a remote control to change the channel, so I flipped through a glamour magazine for a while. The flight was supposed to be wheels up about 5, putting us on the ground at the Midway about 11 or so. So about a 6-hour flight. During nesting season for the albatross, the Midway runway had hundreds of thousands of birds crossing each day. Potential disasters if a jet engine sucked one of them in, or even if the G1 collided with a bird. The albatross weighed about 15 pounds. They're like flying cannonballs with feathers. So flight could only land and take off there at night, when the birds were less active. I never really got used to flying at all over the water at night. I wasn't scared because I'd been flying since I was little, but I still tried my best not to think about it. Knowing Larry and trusting him helped a lot. I'd taken the G1 back and forth to the Midway probably 20 times or so, and most of those were at night. And Larry could probably fly the route blindfolded. I waited for them to come and tell me, and to come to get me and to weigh me. See, the G1 could only hold 3,800 pounds of cargo and people, and that's how much it could still fly if one of the engines went out. Since we got a supply flight only about once a month, that was all our mail, groceries, parts we needed for the generators, other equipment. It meant that we did a lot was simply way too much heavy, or it was heavy. Like milk. A gallon of milk, it weighed 8 pounds. And milk for 50 people? Well, that adds up fast. Thinking about it, I fell asleep on the couch. Larry shook me awake. We're ready to go. Then he asked me about Max and weighing in the paperwork and something. I was still groggy. I just nodded. My watch said 9. That meant we got a late start. He carried my bag, my big bag. I took a small one in my backpack, and I climbed up the short flight of steps and ducked my head as I stepped aboard. All 9 rows of the red upholstered seats were chock full of boxes and cargo, except for 2 seats that were halfway back. The new co-pilot was already up in the cockpit, Max. He looked about 25 or so. I couldn't tell. Younger than AJ, anyway. His dark hair was very soft. Like in the military, he wore the same black pants and a white shirt as Larry. Only, he also sported a black tie. Max glanced my way and didn't say anything. I smiled. Hi. For about a millisecond, he nodded and smiled. But his eyes didn't. They seemed sad. My dad was tall and always had to stoop to avoid the ceiling. But I could walk normally. I'll bite this sideways a little bit, through the narrow cabin back to the 5th row of seats. The bin above my seat was filled with blue mesh bag of Sumatra oranges. They're my favorite. I noticed the Sharpied Mitchell on the label and grinned. Part of my mom's grocery order. I undid the top of the bag and pulled 2 oranges, then folded the bag and slammed the bag shut. The bin across the way was also stuffed, so I put my bag next to my seat. Then I sat down and buckled up. Although Larry had said it numerous times, he always gave me the emergency spiel, pointing out the exits, the compartments that held the emergency raft, the flotation device under my seat. He came across a little cocky, but I'd rather have him self-assured, an ultra-confident pilot, than an insecure one. As always, I listened, but hardly. I'd heard it all before. Larry went back to the cockpit and pulled on his headphones. Not long after that, the propeller started to turn, and the air rushed out of the vent above my head. Sweat trickled down the side of my face, so I twisted the knob all the way and held my face upward, smiling at the cool blast of air. Soon the propellers buzzed, and the plane moved forward, lining up for takeoff. I looked out the window, and the United Airlines jet rumbled as we lifted off, probably heading toward the mainland. A few minutes later, Larry's voice came over the intercom. "Here we go!" My knuckles were white as I grasped the seat, but my grip wouldn't pass as tight, but I wasn't nervous. But I'd watched a plane crash in the show Lost, and I was trying hard not to put that into my mind. The engines motored up full throttled as we stayed there. So it felt as if we were like on a dog on a leash, raring to go as someone held us back. My eyes went spinning at the propeller, already going so fast they were almost invisible. Then the words Rolls-Royce were on the engine. Larry once told me that the Rolls-Royce propellers went counterclockwise. Good Jeopardy question. I leaned back, my head back, and the G-1 surged forward, rocketing down the tarmac until we gained enough speed. Out of the window, I saw the lights of the ships in the Pearl Harbor, then the ships farther out, until they slipped away out of my view, leaving only the darkness beneath. The G-1 flew steadily up until it leveled out, and I relaxed a little bit from the drone of the engines. Home was only a few hours away. Releasing my grip of the seat, I took off my flip-flops, put on my socks, and I got comfortable, still wiped out. I fell asleep. When I woke up, my watch said 1 a.m., so they'd been in the flight for about 3 hours. Lights glowed in the cockpit, but except for a small lighted track along the floor, the galley lights, the cabin was dark. The ride was a little turbulent, but I'd been through a lot worse on flights. An especially rough one had led my mom to say to Larry upon landing, "Well, you earned your money today, huh?" He had shrugged. then said he didn't think about that it was that rough of a flight. And since then, I'd read that turbulence didn't cause the plane to crash, so bumps really didn't bother me. 5 rows up, Larry sat in the cockpit, and Max stood in the galley, sipping from the styrofoam cup of coffee. Not as tall as Larry, Max was thinner, rather wiry, and athletic looking. Max went down to the cockpit and Larry stood. He got up, got a cup of coffee, came my way. There's a storm front that moved in quicker than we expected. I'm going to skirt north a bit, but it shouldn't slow us down much, okay? Okay. Help yourself. He lifted up his cup of coffee and went back to the front. Despite the late hour, my stomach grumbled. So I unbuckled, went to the galley, got an ice and drinks, grabbed a pink can of guava juice, and before rummaging through the big blue plastic cooler full of sandwiches, I chose a thick turkey one and then went back to my seat, unlatching the tray in front of me. I dissected my sandwich, taking off the tomatoes and lettuce and the white cheese before replacing the top of the onion roll. My first bite, the plane shuddered and bumped below me. An especially large lurch in my stomach moved to my throat. Larry's steady voice came over the intercom. Robbie, make sure you're buckled tight. It might get a little rough for a little bit. We should be out of it soon, though. I wrapped up my sandwich, saving it for when the turbulence calmed down. Maybe bumps didn't bother me, but I really didn't like eating during them. As far as I could tell, we were only about an hour and a half from home. The ride got rougher and rougher, so my knuckles got whiter and whiter, and I wished for the midway. Out the window were occasional flashes of lightning, but they didn't illuminate anything except for the rain pelting my window. Constantly lurching forward in the dark, as if we were a car on ice. Leaning out the aisle, I reached and tried to look at the pilots in the cockpit to see if they were especially concerned. But their backs were to me, and their hands looked busy. Larry hadn't announced anything for a while. I seriously wanted to call up to them and ask when we were going to land it, but it seemed stupid. We'll be there when we get there. Just grow up, you big baby. That's what I thought. And then the sounds of the engines got louder. I tried not to think about the dark and the water underneath us. Nothing but the dark and all that flippin' water. Chapter 5. 10 minutes later, although I wouldn't have believed it possible, the turbulence had actually got worse. Now I felt as if we were a snow globe that someone just shook up and just kept on shaking. I lurched and turned into deep plunges that made me feel like we were going to nosedive before I finally came back up. And all that bumping, and while the bumping, a huge thump sent an oxygen mask tumbling down, where the stewards, and they swayed from side to side. Mine swung right in front of my face. Oh my God! What was it? What was I supposed to put it on? I glanced up in front. Neither Larry or Max had donned on a mask. I couldn't very well ignore mine, so I tied a big loop around it just to get it out of my face. Another huge thump popped open a few of the compartment bins above me, and suddenly a quick barrage of soft but forceful punches plummeled my head and shoulders. I was being assaulted as soon as it was over, but I couldn't shriek to fend them off. The oranges from above my bin started to hit me. One landed in my lap, and the others lay all around me, rolling up and down the aisles as the plane moved. I wanted to scream, but I held it in. Panicking wouldn't help anyone, especially not the pilots. Again, I tried to see what they were doing, their demeanor, their attitude. Were they worried? Struggling with the controls? It was impossible to tell from my vantage point. I felt an overwhelming need for reassurance, for someone to tell me everything was going to be okay, that I would be okay, but no one did. As we bounced along, the tears started to slide down my face. I stopped myself, and I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand. You baby! There's no need to cry over a little turbulence. Tons of things are worse than this. And then there was a hush. Not totally quiet, but there was less of a drone sound, that there had been before. And I leaned over, peering out the window on the starboard side. And the end of the wing, there was a blue light winked. Usually the propellers were nearly invisible in the flight because they're turning so rapidly. But as the lightning flashed, I could very nearly clearly see the propeller, circling slowly, turning only with the movement of the plane. That engine had stopped. So, boys and girls, today, I need you to go look up, what does a G1 airplane look like? Is it maybe what you thought? Good luck. Bye.